I am very much looking forward to today's panel session, a nice extension of the panel session yesterday in Sydney. Now, our topic of discussion is building a strong AI presence for SMEs to make the best of what technology can offer them securely. We have 4 great panel members today, and I will introduce each of them and then give them an opportunity to briefly share their thoughts on the topic. Once we've heard from all 4 panel members, we can start asking questions. So you can add your questions directly to the live chat on YouTube at any time. If the question is for a specific speaker, please mention that. Otherwise, I will ask any or all of the panel members. So our first panel member is Matt Sinclair. Matt is the Global Sales Engineering Lead for AI at Microsoft. He is responsible for designing and executing Microsoft's worldwide commercial AI strategy. Matt also works closely with organizations to develop and implement AI technologies at scale, particularly emphasizing responsible AI practices. Previously, Matt has held technical and commercial leadership roles in a number of emerging technologies, including cloud and Internet of Things. Matt also frequently lectures on AI, currently running the AI and Cybersecurity Strategy graduate course at RMIT. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Marty, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, thank you. Our second panel member is Dr. Megan Sebben. Now, Megan is the CSIRO Kickstart Program Manager. CSIRO Kickstart is an initiative for innovative Australian startups and small businesses, providing funding support and access to CSIRO's research expertise and capabilities to help grow and develop their business. The program offers eligible businesses access to dollar-matched funding of up to $50,000 to undertake research activities within CSIRO. Megan's role involves working with the companies to understand their research needs and to facilitate connections with potential project collaborators in CSIRO. To date, over 160 Kickstart projects have commenced since the program's inception in 2017. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks, Marty.
Our third panel member is Johan Locke. Johan is a director with the Insights and Data practice at Capgemini. Johan has 25 years of experience in the technology industry, of which 12 years have been in the financial services. Originally from South Africa, Johan served Barclays as an architect, a project and program manager, the head of technology, the general manager of the innovation COE, where he commercialized Rainfin. Now, Johan moved to Australia in 2016 and has worked for Capgemini and NAB previously. A technocrat at heart, Johan decided in 2019 to take time off to pursue a master's degree in AI, focusing on perceptual robotics at the Georgia Institute of Technology, whilst also lecturing at RMIT and acting as an industry mentor in developing AI strategy and executing at scale. Welcome, Johan.
Thank you for having me.
Our last panel speaker is Dr. Cheng Soon Ong. Cheng is a principal research scientist at the Machine Learning Research Group at CSIRO's Data 61 and is the director of the Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence Future Science Platform at CSIRO. He's also an adjunct associate professor at the Australian National University. His PhD in computer science was completed at the Australian National University in 2005. He was a postdoc at the Max Planck Institute of Biological Cybernetics at the Friedrich Miescher Laboratory in Germany. From 2008 to 2011, he was a lecturer at the Department of Computer Science at ETH Zurich, and in 2012 and 2013, he worked in the diagnostics genomics team at NICTA in Melbourne. Since 2014, Cheng Soon is researching ways to enable scientific discovery by extending statistical machine learning methods with the Machine Learning Research Group in Data 61 in Canberra. Prior to his PhD, he researched and built search engines at Bahasa Malaysia Technologies. He obtained his BE Information Systems and BSc Computer Science from the University of Sydney, Australia. Welcome, Cheng.
Very pleased to be here.
Great. Thank you. So my first question for today, throughout the symposium, and this is targeted at Matt, so Matt, for your attention. Throughout the symposium, our focus has been on identifying and leveraging the intersection between AI, cyber, and SMEs. The work that you are focusing on is very much customer focused, looking at strategies to capitalize on market opportunities through deep technical and industry knowledge. Can you tell us a bit about the role that AI plays in securing technology and where you see the human fitting into the picture?
Yeah, great question to kick off the panel. I'm actually going to answer the second part of that question first about where I see humans fitting into the picture. And in all the work I do across the globe, across a number of different customers, various shapes and sizes, the best implementations I've seen of AI are where the human and the AI technology are working together, where we use AI to complement the human. We use it to allow the human to focus on particular areas of the task, rather than this like fully autonomous world that sometimes we get dreamed up into in the world of movies and sci-fi and things like that. I'm sure we'll get there, but right now it's when the humans and the AI interact together. And of course, the AI helps us better understand patterns and data. So when we marry that with the world of security, we start getting some really interesting trends. And a quick little factoid for you, Microsoft gets 8 trillion security signals every 24 hours. So if you can imagine a human alone trying to pour through 8 trillion data points, trying to figure out what is a security threat, what's not, where to react to, it's impossible. It's also impossible with traditional analytics. And so that's where we apply tools like machine learning to help us understand the patterns, to potentially identify things that humans might miss or draw our attention to areas where we should be paying attention. And that really is where the marriage of AI and machine learning, AI, machine learning and humans come together. The other quick statement I'll make about AI and cyber is we often, or a lot of people I speak to often think they're the only ones with the tools. The protagonists in our stories are the only ones with AI, but in the real world, threat actors have AI and machine learning as well. And so when we're talking to customers about how they can use AI and machine learning in their security systems, we have to remind them that actually everyone kind of has access to this technology. And if you're not trying to leverage machine learning and AI to build up your cyber defenses or identify threat surfaces or whatever it is, well, you're probably falling behind and exposing yourself to these vulnerabilities as well. So I think AI has a huge role to play in making sure we're safe and secure in our operations. It has a huge role to play in helping us identify these patterns and trends, and also has a huge opportunity to play in making humans more productive. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you, Matt. But it's quite scary to say 8 trillion cybersecurity signals per day. That is an enormous amount of things happening. Well, thank you. Well, my next question, Megan, that's for you. Now, your role is to help Australian startups and small businesses access dollar-matched funding and facilitation to undertake research and development projects within CSIRO. Can you tell us a bit about the approach that you would recommend to SMEs to support sustained growth, and also any pointers on technology or AI-driven approach that SMEs should consider? I think this links very nicely to what Matt just said, that if you're not using that, you're falling behind. So what's your advice?
Yes, I mean, AI technologies are applied in essentially every industry. We see a lot of demand for AI related to automation, image and face recognition, natural language processing, all sorts of things. So, in terms of sustained growth, and the thing that we focus on in my team is really these collaborations and how to build your business through successful collaborations with experts in this area that can help you maybe initially test an idea if it's something that's quite new to you. We talked about in George's opening address about the size of businesses that often get involved with these industry research collaborations, and they can often be quite early stage, so may not have an in-house research team yet. But you can still harness and make use of these technologies, and potentially engaging with experts to do that initially to see if it's feasible, if it's going to work for your company and what your product requirements are. Pointers on technology and the AI-driven approach that SMEs should consider. I mean, as I said earlier, AI can be applied to most sectors, and some of the benefits could be in decision making. The automation is obviously a time benefit away from manual tasks. So we've seen a demand for this across so many different industries. Some of them were touched on this morning, companies doing like Critopedia, using it for mobile applications. Singular Health in the health sector is a big one for us. We see it applied to the retail sector, and there's so many opportunities to grow and boost your business through harnessing these technologies.
Right. Thank you for that. Just a quick follow-up question. How do you match the SMEs with the experts? How do you do that matching?
You get to know CSIRO very well is the first step, and then what we do is we get them to fill in an expression of interest form. So that allows us to confirm firstly that the company is eligible for our program or one of the programs that we run, and then if they do qualify for Kickstart, which is the program that I manage, then in that EOI, they'd give a high-level description of what it is that they would like CSIRO to assist them with. So either myself or one of the other facilitators will go through that, usually follow up a call with the company, because sometimes there might be, the EOI might not necessarily touch on where CSIRO's expertise is, but through a conversation, we can really tease out, well, actually, we can help you with this part here potentially. Maybe your first step is an initial project, and then we could follow up with something else. So we then go through our networks at CSIRO. That could be teams that we've worked with previously. We turn to business development managers and really just our network of facilitators through the whole SME Connect program is very good at identifying who is best placed to help the company achieve the outcomes they've outlined in that EOI.
Okay, great. Thank you. My next question is for Johan. Johan, as an experienced project manager within the technology industry, what can you tell us about the application of AI in industry? How can organizations use AI and automation as a technology and business enabler? How do you bring those two things together?
Thank you, Marthie. Look, so when we talk projects, we always think about, I think, the path of least resistance to get to the right outcome. And when we talk AI, strangely enough, the thing that jumps to my mind immediately is not AI, it's the cloud. And why the cloud? Well, if you look into industry at the moment, what you'll see is a large number of organizations rushing to get themselves into the cloud. So this is now AWS and Azure and Google cloud platform. And the question you've got to ask is why? Why is everybody trying to get onto the cloud? If you look at advertisements, it's all for cloud engineers. And the reason is simple. What awaits a company once they get their systems and their data into the cloud is a rich ecosystem of AI capabilities. And those AI capabilities, the very same that a large bank can use, is available to a small SME to be used as well. And at a far less cost than it traditionally would have cost you to build yourself. So once you are in the ecosystem, automation and the predictive capabilities of AI can be leveraged through all stages of your business enablement. So when we think about automation as part of business enablement, and we really want to replace those low-value human tasks, those automation processes are really dependent on your ability to integrate into your existing systems. And these cloud environments offer any company the ability to integrate into a multitude of systems, swap between them in the process workflow with established patterns. And it really makes it easy to use. The second thing that these platforms offer, these cloud environments, and Matt spoke about that, is the security aspect, but it allows you not only to store your data, manage it and clean it, but also to control access to it, which is critically these days because your data is going to be your main asset of your business going forward. And once you're in there, the AI capabilities, and AI is such a broad field, will allow you to really do things with your data. So natural language processing, object recognition, and the ability to string some of these capabilities together is also offered within these environments. Now, the only thing I'll say about AI, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and a lot of people focusing on specific industries at a time. But we need to remember that AI, in its ability to replicate human judgment, at times is very narrow and specific to what it was built. But one of the exciting things about AI at the moment is its ability to learn, to do some self-improvement. So the recent advancements in terms of deep learning and reinforcement learning is really exciting, and things that SMEs should look at utilizing in their businesses when they enable themselves. So to cut it all short, is look at getting to the cloud as an enabler for yourself. Use what is already there for you. Don't go and reinvent it, and look for the least path of least resistance to get to your business outcome.
Thank you, Johan, for summarizing that. And I absolutely agree. I think in a lot of the discussions that we had earlier today with some of the questions, the focus is definitely on the path of least resistance. You want to support the SME so that they can do what they're supposed to do, focus on their business, and the other stuff just sort of needs to happen. So we want the AI to take over the menial tasks, the boring things that we mentioned in some of the earlier sessions. So thank you very much for that. My next question, Cheng, this is for you. Now, the work that you do are fairly technical. For example, the statistical machine learning methods. It's a fairly complex concept. Now, can you please break this down into an easy to understand on how to, for the SMEs to use this to optimize their growth? How can we simplify this?
So it's an excellent question, and it boils down to how many hours do you have for me to simplify this. But jokes aside, I think just putting on my scientist hat, I think looking at the methods, of course, there's a lot of them, and the field is booming and it's growing, and it feels like it's very hard to keep on top of it. I'm going to try and answer that question using a different direction, talking about the kinds of problems we would like to solve with the machine learning methods instead of, and break it down that way. Okay, so I think it's worth recalling that a lot of this modern technology essentially solves something that's, like linear regression, which is a very standard textbook method. And in fact, I even brought a visual aid, on one side about, so there's this thing called the scientific method. And 400 years ago, Francis Bacon invented the Western scientific method, right? On one side, there's data. This is a sequencer. It produces data. It produces a terabyte of data a day if you let it do it, right? And on the other side is knowledge, which is, a mobile phone. These computers today are very, very powerful, right? And we go from data to knowledge in a process that we call observation. Now, if you think about this from a machine learning point of view, and you think of it as linear regression, the input to linear regression needs numbers. The outputs of these kind of sequencing machines are DNA sequences, kind of like natural language, if you like. They're words, and it's this task in machine learning, or AI, if you like, that is called representation learning, which is a way we want to convert from these letters into numbers. Now, figuring out how to do that well is one of the key tasks that any data scientist will have to do. Whether you're converting from images to numbers, it seems quite straightforward, but actually there's some interesting things about how do you represent color, how do you represent distance, how do you represent objects. You could even represent things that's more interesting, like customer graphs or something like that. How do you represent graphs as numbers? So that's one key task that you want to solve. And of course, there's lots of methods. So I'll break it down that way. And now, given that you found a good representation, you want to make, this is somehow the bread and butter of machine learning textbooks. You want to make predictions, right? You want to take, these numbers and generate knowledge out of these numbers such that you can use that. One thing worth mentioning is that a lot of the standard methods are something we call supervised learning methods, which means that you need lots of labels and annotations. When you read the popular press, there's this tension. People say, oh, we've got lots of data. But at the same time, when you talk to people, how come we're not able to use that data? It's because we don't have enough valuable annotations. And these are expensive. These are really, really expensive, really hard to do. So there's all sorts of interesting progresses in recent years. Self-supervised learning, unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, transfer learning, all these interesting ways to deal with the problem of not that you don't have enough data, but actually you don't have enough of the data that you care about, which is the labels, the annotations that you really care about. Now, this is the forward path, right? You find a representation and you do predictions. But what's often forgotten, and I like to kind of raise this point to the attention here, that you often can use the fact that you have knowledge about something, domain knowledge, for example, you have a database of people, and that ages are positive, ages of people are positive, and very rarely over 125, right? And so that knowledge, and using that knowledge to add to your machine learning model is quite hard. But what do you do with that knowledge? You can actually use it, which is the other path of the scientific method, which is to go from knowledge and do experiments to collect better data. Okay, so in a lot of business processes, we tend to think of data as something that somebody else does. But in fact, for most processes that we know about, we can actually control how we collect that data. And this is a very important task. It's a valuable task, but at the same time, there are questions to be answered about, privacy or the ethics of collecting that data. But at the same time, you have to remember, something about your system, you can use that to collect data. So to summarize all that, instead of thinking about the methods, it's worth thinking about the kinds of tasks you want to solve. And I break it down into find a good representation of the data you have, use that to make good predictions. But to do that, you need to figure out how to deal with the lack of labels. And then don't forget about the other way. You have knowledge, use it to collect better data. And there are methods to do that as well.
Thank you very much. I really like the visual aids, and it's really a simplification of this thing that is really so complex with the supervised and unsupervised label and all of those things. I think you put it very nicely just to say data to knowledge through observation. That's a good summary. Thank you. Now, back to the business aspect. Johan, I'm going to throw this one to you. What AI opportunities would you recommend businesses to pay attention to right now? And what do you think is stopping businesses from doing this?
It's difficult to single out a single opportunity, although I do think for SMEs looking to get into the market, there are some industries that are less served than others. So I'm thinking specifically, for example, financial services, well served through AI and lots of people playing in that space. But we've just gone through a pandemic. So the whole way in which we work, do things, interact with each other, the frequency we see our spouses and our kids with have changed, right? So business models around that has to change. So there must be opportunity in that. So I won't call out a single opportunity. That's the first thing. The second one is that AI is it's a wide field, and its applications are even wider. I know a lot of people get mentally stuck in things like machine learning and a response and an answer kind of thing, but AI really does have the ability to innovate most of the things that you're doing, whether or not it be a physical activity, a decision activity, or just a pattern that needs to be built around something. And I think the nice thing for SMEs specifically is that a lot of the innovation is happening in broad daylight and on public platforms like GitHub. A lot of professional researchers and I'll call them amateur researchers like myself mess around on these platforms, share their code, share their ideas, and they're readily available if you're happy to go and have a look and see what people have done previously. Now, the last part of your question is, what's stopping us from using AI? I think perhaps fear, but more likely it's something like a lack of understanding. It is really understanding that when we talk AI, it means first getting to the cloud, right? That's where it's all going to be. The second thing is you don't need the most advanced AI technology in the world to get your idea going. For your idea, somebody has probably built a model that looks like, smells like that already in 5 different places. You just have to go and find it, play around with it and see where the gap is. Do you need to hire a PhD data scientist? Very infrequently do you actually have to do that. Because models get built and that they get sold to you on a per-use basis. So have a look at that capability before you even think about employing necessarily for your business very expensive resources. The AI algorithm, is that the hardest part that you need to get done? No. The hardest part is going and figuring out what AI capabilities do I need to grab here. So object recognition, natural language processing, maybe some advanced analytics, and then stringing it together to improve your business process that you're actually looking to improve. Do you need a big team to get these things done? Also, no. If that's something that's in your understanding, the answer is no. AI does not require big teams, but it does require an understanding of what happens at the top layer in terms of how do we string things together. Underneath, of course, there are many hamsters running on the wheels and getting stuff done and building it and so on. But you yourself as a small organization can actually get in there and make huge strides in your industry. Thanks.
Thank you very Thank you very much for that. I think that's a good lead into my question for Matt. So Matt, do you think the impediments to a business's ability to leverage AI is related to people, process, or technology, and why?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm going to give you a bit of a vapid response and say it's a little bit of all of them, people, process, and prowess. I am going to pick up on something that Johan mentioned, though, around like understanding what's possible with AI, understanding what you can do with it, what tools are out there. I'm actually going to take a step even further back and say it's about misalignments of expectations, realistically. Like, companies see these wonderful academic papers, they see these things in the news, and it both creates fear, as Johan said, and excitement about what AI can do. And then they scurry back to their offices, or virtually in this COVID world, and they say, folks, I've just seen this great thing, let's go and implement it. But it's not something that's real. It's not something that actually has business value, or it's not something that's attainable with the skill set or the funds the organizations have. So a lot of what I do in working with both large and small customers is set the expectations about what's possible based on the skills and the people and the capability that the organization has. And so setting those expectations right is super important. It's then about, again, picking off what Johan said, I would say it's not even about choosing the technology to solve the problem. It's about which problem you're going to solve in the first place. And that's honestly the biggest hurdle that I see with most organizations, is that they're so excited about AI, or maybe they're super afraid. And so they're like, where do we start? And sometimes they'll just do 50 things at once, burn tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a week, and then go, that didn't work, AI is rubbish. But that's not the case. You need to take the time to identify what your strategy is for AI. And that's where the sort of the plan comes into place, thinking ahead, but then considering where you are now and where you want to be. When you've got that idea of where you are now, think about the skills you've got. Again, picking up something on Johan said, you don't need data scientists to solve every AI problem. There's definitely a valid problem space for which data scientists are immensely useful and provide incredible value, but there's a lot of off-the-shelf AI that you can use right off the bat. So, considering how you bring those in. So you have the strategy where you know which kind of areas of the business you want to improve on. You know what level of technology and capability you're playing with. And then the third one I'd include there is bring in partners. And I think this is even a little bit of what Megan said, like bringing in like other SMEs and people who have done this. And don't be afraid to bring in a community of people to help deliver your first AI project. It's something we do all the time at Microsoft. It's not just us, it's our partners. You've got all the folks on the call, I'm sure, have contributed to many projects in companies. And it really is this community to share the learnings about where to get started. And there's many, free forums where you can share those insights as well, whether it's free training online or, joining all the forums like this. So knowing your capability and not being afraid to reach out and bring in partners to support, I think is also critical to getting started on that AI journey.
Thank you, Matt. That is absolutely wise words. And triggering that, and Johan also, just a follow-up from your previous answer, there's a question from the audience. I'm just going to get that up for you. And so we know that bias is an issue with AI. What are the safeguards against bias if someone uses a commercial cloud service? How would you respond to that?
What are the safeguards? That's actually a fairly difficult one, right? So when we talk about bias, bias is usually introduced into AI when we train our underlying data models, and that the typical example people use is when Amazon came out with their facial recognition service, it originally incorrectly classified some black people actually as gorillas and monkeys and stuff like that. And that was because it was biased, because they used the photos of a lot of white people and far less black people to build their model around. So how do you safeguard against the bias? First thing is, when you get an off-the-shelf model, typically this thing comes in a black box, and you don't train the model yourself. And your safeguard is literally just what's on the package to the largest extent. Some of the packages, however, do allow you to put in additional data and retrain your models. Retrain the models are just using their mechanisms, and that's one way of getting out of the bias. But at the end of it, the only way to really be sure that your system has got very little bias in it is to test it to death.
Marthie, if I can jump in on what Johan said,
please.
Working for a commercial cloud service provider, this is something that I know very, very intimately, and something I won't steal too much time because I think Johan has done a great job in responding there. Just a couple of additional items. The first one is, again, picking up what Johan said around this sort of black box notion of these pre-built AI. The accountability is on all of us to ask these questions. So as someone who helps build some of those pre-built models, it was accountable on us as engineers and designers to ask those questions. You as consumers of these models, it's up to you to ask the question. It's actually a bit of this community accountability. Often people try and point the fingers to say, oh, it's the software developers, or it's the company, or it's the people implementing it. But it's all of us to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that this AI is being used responsibly and is as free from bias as possible. I'm not going to say completely eliminated, but as free from bias as possible. The other thing is, if you do decide to build models yourself, there are a ton of open source tools that you can use to basically check and vet to make sure that your models aren't implicit with bias, or to turn that black box into a glass box to let you see inside. And rather than just see like statistics and numbers, but actually see via graphs and graphical interfaces how your model's interacting. And that's a huge space at the moment. If you're interested in that, there's things called FairLearn and Interpret ML and all these open source sort of technologies. The final one I'll mention is around the process that organizations go through. And this links back to sort of my question. When we talk to organizations about implementing AI, we talk about a responsible AI strategy and a responsible data strategy. And not being afraid to upfront say, what happens if my AI makes a wrong decision? What are we going to do about it? Getting ahead of it before that actually happens is super critical. Walking through that journey and trying to mitigate that impact as much as possible is super important. I've seen a lot of projects go really wrong where people forget to take that time at the start, and it shuts down entire departments because they've compromised customer data, or they've hopefully not hurt someone or hurt the reputation of the organization. So their people are important in terms of all of our accountability to make sure that we're checking and asking the right questions. The tools that are open source and available, if you're building models, making sure you're leveraging them, and then the processes as well. And there's tons of free resources in that online that you can check out around that. We've got the AI Business School, which walks through all this as well. But the tools, the peoples and processes, it's kind of up to all of us to make sure. And I'll be the first to put my hand up and say us as technology companies are most certainly accountable as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Matt. I'm going to pass over to Cheng now. Some of your work is focused on using deep learning to extract meaningful data and apply explainable AI for decision making. How can SMEs use this technology advances to better secure their businesses in the cyber domain?
Before I answer the question, I'd like to echo something Matt said earlier, which is I think getting the expectations right is really, really important. I think before you get the shiniest new thing, it's worth making sure that the expectation of what this new thing will do for your business is super important. I cannot stress that enough. And more and more I find myself being the wet blanket in the room saying, AI is not magic. You need to take care of everything else. But more concretely, right? I think that there is, as people have already mentioned so far, Johan has said this, Matt said this, that there's lots of resources out there already, and you can kind of educate your staff and build capability. And a lot of these resources are free and they're very, very good. I think we are somehow in this nice age of AI where people are generating a lot of these resources. So that's one thing. I think there's very much a capability building thing so that, the AI systems are black boxes, but maybe we can, have an understanding of how these black boxes behave. I guess the analogy I like to pull is vacuum tubes, which were, about 100 years old today. They only use in high-end hi-fi systems. We don't really need to know what happens inside the vacuum tubes, but we have these very, very clear standards to study them and to know how to check whether they're doing the right thing and things like that. So that's kind of the bigger question of AI. Now, how to use that for decision making or explainable systems and things like that. I like to go back to this idea that the scientific method, right? I think the way to think about it is to not think of AI as giving you yes/no answers or giving you predictions that are correct or not correct. I'd like to encourage everybody to think about AI in terms of sorting the options that you have. You use the AI systems to score things, give you probabilities of events happening, however you want to use it. Use it to score the possible scenarios that you have, and then build tools to be able to analyze those scenarios and come back to your business model and whatever you want to do in your business, right? Don't think of the AI as, oh well, the AI is going to give me yes/no answers. I'm going to trust it fully, because we all know that that's a route to disaster. So use the AI for scoring, and then I'd like to encourage everybody to think about experimentation. I mean, there's a very, very well used tool called A/B testing in the software world, right? If you're interested in something, you take some subpopulation of your customers and you do an experiment on them. It's called A/B testing. You can use something more advanced like offline policy evaluation, or something even more advanced, which is causality or interventions. But at the end of the day, the key message there is, use AI for scoring. Don't trust it fully, and use it to do small experiments.
Great. Thank you for that, Cheng. Okay, I'm going to have one more question to Megan now.
Mm-hmm.
Megan, in your experience, what sort of problems are SMEs facing that could be addressed with AI technology? These could be either existing AI applications or applications that you think could be really useful in an SME context.
I mean, I think there's lots of them in the business context. Improving efficiencies absolutely is one. We're collecting so much data these days. How do we process that? How can businesses benefit from AI in terms of better understanding their customers and their markets? Similarly, supply chains, that's a huge area where AI can and is being of great benefit, understanding this process of paddock to plate and trust provenance and these sorts of aspects. So we're collecting a lot of data and using IoT, Internet of Things, and all sorts of sensor measurements, and then being able to utilize this data to make decisions. I think also, this can be in other industries as well, where we can use AI to not just improve efficiencies, but looking at reducing costs, whether that be financial costs. If you think about the mining industry and where you're going to undertake exploration, could be reducing environmental costs as well. So there are technologies out there and companies out there doing this. And the health example we heard earlier today, Singular Health, we see this, really, it's such a common question that we get from businesses is how can they apply AI better within their operations. So, that the answer to that question is so broad. There's a lot of different ways that companies can benefit from this. But I really think, in my experience with the companies I speak to, data analytics, image and face recognition, natural language processing, and other predictive capabilities are really sort of game changers for a lot of the SMEs that we deal with.
Great. Thank you very much, Megan. Sorry, my voice is going off, so lots of talking today. I would like to just thank all of our panel members today. Thank you. This was great. And I think there's a lot of very important factors points that came out today. Everything from everybody have access to AI, not just the good guys, so the bad guys also. So if you're not using it, you're missing out on something. Or the data to knowledge through observation. The collaboration is really important. If you're not collaborating, again, you're going to miss out. So this is open to any of our panel members. Any final thoughts that you would like to just leave our audience with? What's your key takeaway message? Who would go?
I
let
can
me
chime
jump.
in something there. Oh,
Well,
mine is very simple and very quick. It's reach out and connect. You know, this is new for a lot of people. It's a bit unknown, and we talked about it being a little bit scary, or maybe there's just a general lack of awareness in some cases. So, you know, reach out and have a conversation. You know, myself, my team, especially, we're really happy to. We might not always have the answer. We might not always be the best collaboration partner, but where we can, we will try and point people in the right direction. So yeah, don't be scared to pick up the phone, send an email, and start connecting with people in this space that can provide some guidance on how you can benefit from implementing AI technologies.
Right. Thanks, Megan. Cheng.
Actually, I was going to say roughly the same thing, actually. And I can't stress the reaching out. Maybe the reaching out from the other direction, make your work open. I think in Australia, we worry a lot about people stealing our idea, if you like. There was a talk by Jeremy Howard quite recently, who just moved back from Silicon Valley to Queensland, who made this point that actually, you know, there's no reason to not share a lot. I mean, maybe don't share private business type things, but you know, really share the kind of technologies that you're developing, share the knowledge, share your ideas in local meetups. Grow that community, because I think there's a great opportunity in Australia. We've got an amazing talent, and reaching out to provide impetus to this community to grow and get bigger. I think this is a great time to be.
Thank you. Johan, last comments from you?
I think just linking back to Cheng, really the knowledge base in the world globally is growing. It's growing quicker every day. So somebody has thought of something similar to your idea already. Go and investigate first before you spend resources trying to build it and reinvent it. And I like to say, be brave, right? Just get in there. Try something. It won't be perfect the first time, but that's the iterative process you got to get into as an organization. Thanks.
Thank you. And Matt, last words from you.
Very quick last words. I'm actually going to echo something that Cheng said way back early on, which is start small, experiment. Just pick an idea and just go for it. Take some what Johan said, you know, explore the problem space, take what Megan said, reach out to people, but get started. That is the most important thing. This train is moving at 1,000 miles an hour, and if you're not on, you're missing out. And this is the perfect time to get started. So that would be my parting words.
Thank you. That's quite catchy. Just get started. Megan and Johan, Matt, thank you all. It was really great to have you on board. And thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks everybody.